All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back for section 4. Yes, I know you're all excited, so let's go ahead and get started. Here's our funny internet picture of the section. Oh, they're so funny. All right, so malware. Today we're talking about malware. Malware is kind of the relatively recently invented term for all the different kinds of software that is malicious, hence the name malware. So it's any kind of software that you don't want on your computer. There's lots of different types, and this subsection we're going to be talking about the different types. Now, interestingly, what part of the bad guy malware process is illegal? Well, making it is not illegal. Having it is not illegal. It's not until they use it that it becomes illegal in the United States. So as if I was a security researcher or a white hat hacker or something, I would be free to create malware and use it on my own systems or systems which I had permission to use it on in order to accomplish some goal. But as soon as I either intentionally or inadvertently put it on somebody else's system, that's when it becomes an illegal act. Okay? There's a lot of it going on out there. Okay? Symantec is one of the largest kind of malware researchers in the world, and they recorded 6,549 new malware variants in 2014. That is a huge number. Okay? So, what are the different kinds of malware? Well, number one, there are viruses. These are the ones that everybody thinks of, right? These are the ones that, I downloaded a virus. Oh, ho-hum. All right. Viruses, they have a lot of different, I guess you could call them goals, all right? Different viruses have different goals. They have different purposes. A lot of them are just meant to be annoying. Some of them can destroy data. Some of them can steal data. There's lots of different possible outcomes that those viruses can have. But one of the definitional requirements of viruses is that they need some kind of human interaction to spread. Okay? So a human needs to open an email or click on a link or download a file or do something that infects their computer. Okay? Now, there are two kind of special subset viruses, or types of virus, I should say, that I'm going to talk about. One of those is boot sector viruses. So, floppy disks and your hard drive and all these things have what's called a boot sector. It's usually the very, very first sector or few sectors on your drive, and there are viruses designed specifically for those boot sectors so that the virus kind of activates itself as part of the sequence that happens when a computer turns on or when a disk is accessed. Okay, one of the first big viruses was one called Elk Cloner, and it was a boot sector virus. Some random teenage kid in middle of nowhere America decided to prank his friends, and he created this Elk Cloner virus where it would attach itself to a floppy disk and then spread from there. And basically, it was something like, I don't remember exactly, like the 50th time you access the disk, there would just be a pop-up on your screen that had this little poem about the Elk Cloner. And of course, it ended up spreading out of control. But it was originally intended just as a prank. But because it was in that boot sector, because it was in that place that was accessed every time that disk was accessed, it became very difficult to get rid of. And then there's macro viruses. Okay, so different software programs in the 21st century have different. They're basically programming languages built into them. The most obvious example here is the Microsoft Office suite. They have their own macro functions, and you can create viruses specifically designed and built and spread using those macro functions. So there are viruses that spread just through Microsoft Office documents, if that makes sense. So there are also Trojans. Trojans, it comes from the old legend of the Trojan horse, where the Trojans were assaulting. Oh God, who were they assaulting? No, yeah, I'm not a history teacher. Anyway, it was somebody else assaulting Troy. The Greeks were assaulting Troy, and they couldn't get in. They couldn't break down the walls. So finally, they just left, but they left behind this big wooden horse. And the Trojans made the mistake of bringing that wooden horse into their city. A bunch of soldiers waited until nightfall, then popped out of the horse, opened the gates, and the rest of the army came in and took the city of Troy. So this is kind of the software version of that. Okay, a Trojan is something that kind of hides. It'll be within an illegally downloaded computer game or something. So if I'm a pirate, a digital pirate, and I want to download the latest video game, I might go download this video game and start playing it. And unknowingly, when I downloaded that cracked copy of that video game, somebody had attached a Trojan to it. So I download and install the game. Now the Trojan is on my computer and it can release its payload. Okay, and again, these payload for Trojans, like viruses, they can be very, very different things. Some of the more common ones are keyloggers, right? So a keylogger is essentially just a program, and all it does is record the buttons that are hit on your keyboard, and then either stores them for later retrieval or sends them off to the bad guy. Okay, so just think about all the things that you type in on your keyboard every day. Everything from usernames and passwords to all kinds of different accounts, to credit card numbers and social security numbers and phone numbers and private information, and if you have a diary on your there's all kinds of stuff that you would not want them to see. But basically, if you deploy one of these keyloggers, you receive all that information. It's just a giant text file with all the buttons that person has pushed, including all that usernames and passwords and all that stuff. Another common payload for Trojans is either file or peripheral access, right? And by peripheral, I mean webcams, I mean microphones, stuff like that. So if I accidentally get one of these Trojans on my laptop, the bad guys could then have access to my laptop's camera, okay, and microphone. And it's a big enough deal that I think it was Mark Zuckerberg. It was one of those big tech people, either Mark Zuckerberg or Jeff Bezos or one of those guys. He was recently filmed, interviewed in front of his desk, and people noticed, looking in the background, that his laptop on his desk had a Post-it note over the camera, right? And people like him put that there because they're afraid that they might, somebody might have gained access to that camera and they don't want them to see everything that they're doing. Another big one is kind of a proxy service that's unknown, right? So in a previous section, we talked about how proxies work, right? So now imagine that you could kind of infect people and make them be your proxy, so that now I connect to their computer and then connect to my target, and then when the police get mad at me for doing the bad thing that I did to the target, who are they going to catch? Well, they're going to catch the person who is infected with my proxy program, not me. Make sense? All right. Worms. Worms are very similar to viruses. They can have lots of different effects, but the difference between a worm and a virus is that worms do not require any human intervention to spread. Okay, so you just launch them and they just go. Because of this, they have relatively very short lifetimes. Viruses can be spreading for years, whereas a lot of worms can have, lifetimes measured in a few hours, because they spread extremely quickly. Back in 1988, on a previous section, I talked about the Morris worm, where there was that guy who kind of sort of accidentally launched this worm and it took down a significant chunk of the entire internet. That had a very, very short lifetime, and it caused a lot of damage within a few hours, because it specifically didn't need any human interaction to spread. It just went. It infected systems, and it was, as fast as the systems could process the requests and send out clones of the worm, that's how fast it spread. So that Morris worm, though, interestingly, resulted in the creation of the first Computer Emergency Response Team, or CERT. Okay? These are teams that are specifically designed to go out and fix problems or diagnose issues, or if some organization or government entity or university or company or whatever has some kind of major cyber event, these different certs will come out and kind of fix the problem or diagnose what went wrong or do the forensics and try to figure out who did it and all, but most importantly, they try to make sure that it never happens again. Make sense? All right. Botnets. Botnets are really interesting. So a botnet is kind of a virus, kind of a Trojan, but essentially you get a malware, a piece of malware on your computer, and it allows somebody else to control your machine in various nefarious ways. So the way it works is there's one guy or a small group of guys at the top. They're called the bot master. They send out this essentially virus, or a bot virus, and it gets infected on your computer. And the more computers they can infect, the larger the botnet grows. The largest botnet on record was like a couple of million computers, like 2 or 3 million, I think, as of the time of this recording. Then what the botnet virus does essentially is it sits quietly on your machine and it contacts a server somewhere. Sometimes like an ICQ server, sometimes some other server that the master has co-opted, but it just sits and it listens and it waits. Okay, and then if the master wants to do something with all these assorted computers that are at his command, he sends a command or posts a command on the server. All the bots hear this command and they say, "Oh, yep, good to go. I will do that," and then they proceed to do the thing. Right? One of the more common uses for a botnet is a distributed denial of service attack. Right? So if I get upset at PayPal is a fairly major business. They have tons and tons of servers, tons and tons of bandwidth. There's not really a lot I can do as an individual to overwhelm their servers, is there? No. But now imagine I have a few 100,000 bots at my command. I can instruct every one of those few 100,000 bots to start sending Amazon like junk data or invalid requests or all kinds of different stuff that occupies the PayPal servers so much that they can't deal with, they don't have the resources to deal with legitimate traffic, and thus they are cut off from their customers. Best case scenario for the bad guy, the entire website or service or server just shuts down. But even best case scenario for the service, their services are much slower, and that makes it more difficult for legitimate customers to access, and that can lose them millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars. So they've had recorded instances of people who control botnets threatening like gambling websites. Obviously not a lot of gambling websites here in the United States, but in other countries, lots of gambling websites. Like right before the Super Bowl, like the week before the Super Bowl or some other, the FIFA World Cup or, whatever. These bot masters will threaten betting websites and say, hey, if you don't pay me $10,000, I'm going to release my botnet on you the week before this major sporting event, and you're going to lose gazillions of dollars in bets. And a lot of times the websites will just pay up because it's the $10,000 they're going to pay to the bot master is going to be far, far, far cheaper than the amount of money they're going to lose if they actually get attacked, right? Another thing you can do with a botnet is hide files. You can kind of, if I have some kind of nefarious programs, whether it's other pieces of malware or child porn or, the nuclear secrets of France or whatever that I've stolen, instead of keeping those on my computer, where, if the police arrest me, they're going to find all those files, I can keep those stored on the computers of all those other people, right? So now whenever I want to access them, I just have to access my botnet and then look at those files instead of having them stored locally on my machine. And then another thing you can do is spam. Lots of spam creators will use botnets to spread spam because if you block one person, if I start getting spam about, Cialis or medical this or, whatever, I can block one person. But then the botnet creator just has to move on to the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one. And if they have 10,000 computers at their command, I'm not going to sit there and block all 10,000 of them. You know what I mean? So it's a very, very efficient way of spreading spam that gets by a lot of blocking software. Now, what's really interesting is just recently, just in the news within the last year or so, somebody created a botnet not out of like traditional computers and laptops, but out of the Internet of Things. And the Internet of Things is this phrase that we use to describe kind of all the other stuff connected to the internet, right? So I just got a new air conditioning system in my house, and my thermostat is connected to the internet so that I can control my thermostat over a cell phone, mobile app connection. Some people's refrigerators now connect to the internet so that they can, see what they have in their fridge while they're at the grocery store. They just open up the little app and then they can, there's a little camera inside the fridge and they can look and see what they have. People have doorbells with cameras. So if somebody rings your doorbell and you're not home, you can bring up the camera from your cell phone and see who's at your door and see if it's, the UPS guy or somebody casing the joint for a burglary or whatever. So that's the Internet of Things. It's just all kinds of different stuff connected to the internet that is not kind of a traditional computer or laptop or cell phone or tablet or whatever. We have a recorded instance now of somebody creating a botnet out of these Internet of Things devices and then using that botnet for an attack, which is really, really interesting because people who create these Internet of Things devices aren't thinking about security. Security usually is kind of an afterthought with these Internet of Things devices. So I'm not going to install an antivirus on my thermostat. I'm not going to notice if it starts acting funny at 3, 4 in the morning. I'm not going to spend the amount of attention on that thermostat that I am on my home computer, which means it's much more susceptible to these kind of infections, and there's a gazillion of them out there. I mean, there are now more devices connected to the internet than there are people on Earth. So there are so many of these that if I can create and write the correct bot program to infect these devices, it's going to be far easier to create a botnet out of those devices than it would to create one for computers, which now often have antivirus that'll block the software, or the people will notice, or whatever. So botnets are a very interesting kind of subsection of cybercrime. Yeah. Then the last one we're going to talk about today is ransomware. Ransomware is relatively new amongst these other malware types, but essentially what ransomware does, and this is really insidious. This is just evil. You download this program accidentally, usually through a Trojan or some other kind of bad link or something. But you get this malware on your computer, and then what it does is it encrypts either all of your hard drive or most of your hard drive or some section of your hard drive, but it uses encryption to completely lock away most of your information on your hard drive. Then it displays an image like what you see down here, right? Sometimes they pretend to be the FBI. Sometimes they pretend to be some other police agency. Sometimes they just say, hey, we're hackers and we encrypted your computer. And they demand payment, usually in some kind of cryptocurrency like Bitcoin or some other kind of, Ethereum or Litecoin or, one of those cryptocurrencies, which are much, much, much harder to trace than, say, US dollars or euros or pounds. And so at this point, you kind of have two choices. You can format and reinstall your hard drive, losing every piece of data that you had on it, or at least all the stuff that they successfully encrypted. Or you can pay the money. And if you pay the money, there's a chance you will get the key to unlock your computer, and there's a chance that they'll just take your money and ignore you. So it's really a matter of how important is that information, do you have any backups, and how much are they asking for, right? So 70% of businesses that get hit by ransomware pay the fine. They just pay the money because it's cheaper for them to pay the money than it is to format, reinstall all those computers that are infected and try to recreate all the information that was on those computers. 20% of those businesses that pay over $40,000. Okay, so ransomware has become a very good economic money maker for these bad guys. So ransomware is one of the prime examples. It's not the only example, but it is the prime example on why backups are so important. Not only should you have backups, you should have multiple backups. You should have both on-site backups, meaning at the same physical location as your device or network or computer or whatever, but you should also have off-site backups. So personally, what I do, I have an external hard drive, which I don't know if the cord's going to reach, but see, here's my external hard drive. I have backups of all my important documents and important stuff on that external hard drive. So if my main hard drive either breaks or, if my main hard drive either breaks or gets taken over by ransomware or whatever, I can, no problem, I format, reinstall, load all my important files back from that. But also, in addition to that on-site backup, I have an off-site backup, because if my house burns down or gets hit by a meteor or whatever, and my computer and this local backup are destroyed, I still want to have that information. So in addition to that external hard drive, I also use Google Drive, and I put all my important documents and pictures and stuff I would hate losing onto Google Drive. And now, basically, no matter what happens, as long as I'm alive and have access to a computer and the internet, I have access to those files. Okay. Now, that's the last of the different types of malware. But two lessons. One, this is not a complete list. For instance, I didn't talk about spyware. I didn't talk about a few other kinds of malware. But these are just kind of the more common ones, the ones you're going to hear about more, the ones that you're going to see more, the ones that, the media talks about. And second lesson, a lot of these are, have overlap, right? So there might be a Trojan that delivers ransomware, or there might be a virus that installs, this or that. I mean, so one program, one infected email, one, bad link on a website might have a piece of malware on it that falls into multiple categories. It could be both a virus and ransomware. It could be both a Trojan horse and a botnet infection, right? So keep that in mind. These are not these nice distinct groups. This is a very much kind of a shades of gray. Just because you're in one group doesn't mean you're not in the other groups. And these malware can do and can cause effects that is basically completely within the imagination of the person who created it. So anything your computer can theoretically possibly do, some bad guy can make malware that does that thing. Okay, it could be a combination of problems, could be just one problem, could be a relatively minor fix, could be a huge giant, have to completely start from scratch with a fresh hard drive kind of problem, and everything in between. But anyway, we will be back next time, talk a little bit more about malware.